We live in an era characterized by a profound and subtle displacement of our primary reality, an age where our sensory landscapes are dominated by the soft, continuous hum of a laptop cooling fan and the dry, artificial heat of an indoor radiator. If we look closely at our immediate physical surroundings in this very moment, we can observe a strange, unprecedented architecture of human existence. We sit in climate-controlled offices and rooms where the air is perfectly regulated, isolated from the natural shifting rhythms of the earth, while our attention is pulled entirely elsewhere. The natural light of the sun, which has guided human consciousness for millennia, is systematically replaced by the cold, unblinking, luminescent blue glow bouncing off the pale skin of our faces and hands, reflecting off large corporate office windows that look out onto concrete horizons. If we listen to the ambient landscape of our spaces, we do not hear the wind moving through leaves or the slow settling of the soil. Instead, we hear the faint, continuous, static hum of high-powered server cooling fans, the distant drone of urban transit, and the near-silent, rapid click of plastic keys. In our palms, we hold small sheets of black glass that serve as portals to a boundless, chaotic universe of synthetic information, analytics dashboards, metric graphs, and subscription alerts. Our thumbs move with a repetitive, hyperfast, almost involuntary physical twitch, scrolling down an endless pane of digital glass, searching for a phantom signal of resolution that never arrives. We are physically frozen in modern architectural containers, yet our awareness is scattered across a vast global network of ghosts, leaving our biological bodies completely stranded in the dark. This hyper-connected existence has birthed a profound psychological paradox that we carry with us through every hour of the day, transforming our deepest creative impulses into a relentless chore. We live in the golden era of the passion economy, where we are continuously told that to be successful, we must turn every personal hobby, every creative spark, and every joyful outlet into a monetized asset, a personal brand, or a digital commodity. We have allowed our undivided value to thousands of tiny digital shards, traded away for the cheap currency of likes, metrics, and algorithmic validation. As we sit here together in the quiet theater of this present moment, let us allow the momentum of that transactional world to slow down, if only for a brief second. Let us notice what happens when we place that pane of black glass face down on the table beside us. The screen grows dark, the flashing notifications cease their frantic blinking, and we are suddenly left face to face with the flat, silent reflection of our own countenance in the dead glass. In that sudden suspension of input, a quiet, hollow exhaustion rises up from the depths of our bones to meet us. It is the exhaustion of a living organism that has spent years trying to live outside of its own skin, an entity that has been running a continuous marathon through a labyrinth of reflections, chasing an idealized ghost of who we think we ought to be, while our actual flesh and blood starves of genuine, unfiltered presence. To truly understand how deeply we have been captured by this illusion, we must trace this restlessness away from our external devices and map it directly onto the biological topography of our own bodies, where a beautiful, thriving timberland has been subjected to continuous, high-pressure friction. The mind behaves like two dry pieces of wood being rubbed together constantly under the high-pressure demands of industrial consistency, grinding away until the living canopy of our inner forest is reduced to smoldering embers and sterile grey ash, leaving no warmth left for the cold winter seasons of our lives. The body does not speak in the abstract language of concepts or algorithms. It speaks in the raw, honest vernacular of somatic sensation, and it never lies about the state of our mind. Let us take a moment to gently sweep our awareness through the physical frame we inhabit right now, noticing the exact structural price we pay for living inside the mirror maze of digital curation and forced monetization. Observe the heavy, mechanical tilt of the head, because we spend hours a day bending our gaze downward toward our screens. The anterior neck muscles and the sternocleidomastoid are trapped in a state of chronic, agonizing constriction. This forward head posture of evaluation pulls our skull out of its natural alignment with the spine, forcing the muscles at the base of our skull to harden into rigid, calcified knots that clamp down on the neural pathways, sending a dull, localized pressure radiating across our brow. We are literally holding our heads up against a self-imposed torrent of artificial judgment, walking through the world with our physical gaze permanently locked into a narrow, downward arc of comparison. If we drop our awareness further down into the torso, we can feel how this cognitive hypervigilance has structurally compromised our breathing apparatus and our emotional center, choking out the wild, uncoerced spaces of our being. The middle back and the rhomboids are frozen solid, pulling our shoulders forward and collapsing the chest cavity into a protective, hollow cage. This physical cavern is a biological reflex of defense, a somatic shield built to protect a heart that feels perpetually exposed to the public gaze of the digital marketplace, where every moment of joy must be verified by a transaction. Because the chest is restricted, our breath cannot drop into the deep, nourishing basin of the lower abdomen instead. It hitches high in the throat, shallow and rapid, keeping our sympathetic nervous system locked in a permanent, low-grade survival loop. We can feel a tight, cold contraction gripping the upper digestive tract and the stomach, a visceral somatic echo of an ambient, systemic anxiety that whispers we are never quite enough as we are, and that our worth is only equal to our latest output. Even our eyes are tired. The tiny muscles surrounding the optic nerves are permanently strained from tracking the highly saturated, flickering pixels of our curated personas, their natural peripheral vision completely atrophied. We have become a society of disembodied minds, treating our physical vessels as mere scaffolding to carry our thinking brains from one screen to the next, entirely blind to the rich, instinctive intelligence waiting in our bones. This internal fracturing is the direct result of a profound modern crisis. We have traded the direct, vibrant experience of baseline reality for the exhausting curation of an idealized digital artifact, turning a sacred inner fire into an efficient burning furnace. We stand before the vast, clear reservoir of our lives, and instead of tasting the water, we spend our energy trying to paint a picture of ourselves drinking it for an unseen audience. We have allowed the mind to evolve from a natural mirror that simply reflects the world into a sprawling, complex maze of distorted mercury glass, where every thought, every emotion, and every human experience must be immediately evaluated for how it can be packaged, stylized, and displayed. We live in a split consciousness, permanently haunted by a digital ghost-optimized, pristine version of ourselves that never sleeps, never ages, never makes mistakes, and never feels lonely. We look at our actual, messy, unedited human lives through the lens of this flawless phantom, and we are filled with a sudden toxic grief. We look at our grey morning hair, our tired eyes, our ordinary moments of sadness, and our professional uncertainties, and we judge them as intolerable defects, failing to realize that the standard we are measuring ourselves against is a weightless, bloodless simulation generated by a mathematical algorithm designed to monetize our self-doubt. Let us pause here and allow our awareness to rest heavily in the immediate, unembellished reality of the room we are occupying. Notice the simple, unglamorous truths that the digital world tries so desperately to help us escape. The specific temperature of the air entering our nostrils, the texture of the fabric pressing against our skin, the ordinary sound of a car passing on the street outside, and the natural, unaccelerated rhythm of our own heartbeat. There is no filter on the room around us. There is no audience scoring our presence, and there are no metrics validating our worth. There is only the vast, quiet space of a single human being breathing in the dark. We are being called to look directly into the mechanism of our own distraction, to witness the absolute futility of trying to find a home inside a hall of mirrors. We cannot cure our identity dysmorphia by editing the image more meticulously, nor can we find peace by gathering more praise for a phantom that does not exist. The only way out of the maze is to turn our gaze away from the glass entirely, to drop our tools, and to discover the boundless, uncarved beauty of the raw vessel that has been sitting here in the stillness all along, waiting for us to finally come home to our own skin. To understand how we became so profoundly entangled in this web of creative exploitation and digital assetization, we must observe the living, breathing laboratory of our daily interactions. Consider a contemporary archetype that walks among us in every creative agency, entrepreneurial workspace, and digital marketplace: the spent innovator, an individual who has built an entire existence upon the structural platform of algorithmic consistency. From the outside, this person appears to be the absolute apex of modern success, prolific, highly monetized, possessing an enviable personal brand, and surrounded by a continuous stream of subscription updates and data validations. They are praised by their peers for their relentless drive, and envied for their ability to convert raw human passion into a profitable digital stream. Yet, if we pull back the polished curtain of this socially celebrated facade and look into the private reality of their internal landscape, we discover a biological and psychological system operating under conditions of total systemic bankruptcy. This individual has subconsciously adopted an unexamined survival blueprint which dictates that their fundamental safety, belonging, and right to exist are entirely conditional upon their capacity to produce. They view a seasonal drop in creative output, an uninspired afternoon, or a natural moment of artistic stagnation, not as a healthy cycle of the human mind, but as an active, existential emergency that threatens their survival. Consequently, they look at their own authentic feelings, their genuine fatigue, their need for unmonetized leisure, and their quiet desire for creative privacy not as sacred signs of self-preservation, but as dangerous liabilities that must be aggressively edited, suppressed, and hidden from public view. Every creative impulse becomes a complex, high-stakes tactical calculation, where they filter their joy through the matrix of market metrics, systematically reshaping their unique voice to mirror whatever the collective crowd expects of them. They have transformed their inner world into a permanent, high-alert evaluation furnace, running under the terrifying structural assumption that if they stop performing this role of the ultimate creator for even a single hour, their true, empty reality will be exposed, causing their digital empire to collapse and triggering the ultimate catastrophe of irrelevance. This pattern of relentless production and identity suppression is far more than a simple lifestyle choice. It writes its story directly into the physical tissue and neural pathways of our human anatomy. The body acts as a faithful, non-negotiable archive to our psychological neuroses, recording the exact geometric shape of our transactional anxieties within our muscles, fascia, and nervous systems. When we spend our days locked in the frantic attempt to convert our pure joy into a marketable asset, our biological organism believes we are facing an immediate material threat to our social belonging and safety. Notice the specific, predictable blueprint of this physical tension within our own frames as we sit here. A severe, heavy constriction anchors itself directly into our solar plexus and upper stomach, creating a tight muscular brace against the world, as if our body is permanently preparing our abdomen to receive a physical blow. Because this central junction is frozen, our breath cannot drop into the soft, expansive depths of the belly. Instead, it hitches high in the thoracic cavity, forcing us to draw shallow, rapid, and clavicular drafts of air that signal our autonomic nervous system to remain in a perpetual state of high-alert survival. This chronic tightening migrates outward, embedding itself along the intercostal muscles that bridge our ribs, locking our chest into a rigid, protective cage. This physical cavern is a biological reflex of defense, a somatic shield built to protect an emotional heart that feels perpetually exposed to the transactional scrutiny of the digital marketplace. If we look into the extremities of our frame, we can feel an icy, deadened numbness creeping through our hands, wrists, and fingers, representing a profound somatic disconnection from our primary creative instruments. Prolonged hours spent gripping digital interfaces, combined with an underlying unconscious pressure to produce, have caused the tendons and nerves of our forearms to shorten and calcify, cutting off the warm, fluid currents of energy that connect our creative expression to the intuitive wisdom of our bones. Our shoulders are pulled upward and forward, creating a heavy burden across the upper trapezius, a physical manifestation of trying to carry the immense weight of an artificial corporate persona. Even our facial expressions are micromanaged. The masseter and temporalis muscles of the jaw lock in a miser-like grip that echoes our mind's refusal to surrender control or show creative vulnerability. The tongue, which should rest softly on the floor of the mouth like a sleeping animal, is pressed flat and hard against the hard palate, a somatic reflex of holding back unexpressed frustrations, unmonetized ideas, and unresolved choices. We are walking through our lives encapsulated in an armored shell of our own making, our bodies spent and depleted by the sheer physical effort of maintaining a defense against a baseline reality that we have deemed commercially unacceptable. The great deception of this state of being is that the analytical mind completely mistakes this exhausting circular motion for genuine creative progress. When we are caught in a loop of identity curation and metric comparison, our brain experiences a distorted sense of productivity. The intellect tells us that because we are feeling distressed, because we are burning cognitive energy, and because we are constantly scanning our environments for things to leverage, we must be actively optimizing our lives. We tell ourselves that our intense creative anxiety is a form of high standards, that if we do not suffer over our ordinary human limitations, it means we lack the drive to innovate. But if we analyze the psychology of this process objectively, we see that this constant comparative scrolling and self-editing is actually an elaborate, unconscious mechanism designed to avoid the raw discomfort of the present moment. True creative development is non-linear, spacious, and leads to an actionable sense of internal peace. Algorithmic production is cyclical, redundant, and serves only to magnify our sense of inner emptiness. It is the equivalent of a woodsman standing in a forest, gripped by winter, violently rubbing two dry pieces of wood together to create industrial heat, while the friction burns slowly consume the very timber structure he needs for long-term shelter. We are driving our biological vehicle, with the accelerator pressed flat to the floor while the transmission is locked firmly in neutral, wondering why our engine is smoking and why we have not moved an inch closer to feeling genuinely fulfilled and secure. This psychological loop creates a state of profound identity dysmorphia, a systemic draining of our finite cognitive and emotional resources. Every single day, the modern environment forces us to evaluate thousands of curated artifacts, comparing our behind-the-scenes reality with the highlight reels of the rest of the world. When the mind lacks an organic center of gravity, when it views every ordinary creative drought as a potential catastrophic mistake that must be edited out, the executive functioning of our consciousness begins to degrade. We find ourselves standing in the middle of our lives, surrounded by genuine, unmonetized blessings, yet completely paralyzed by a profound sense of overwhelm and insufficiency. The simple has become monumental, because our reservoir of psychological energy has been entirely leaked out through the thousands of small cracks of our continuous digital self-monitoring. We become trapped in an agonizing state of ambivalence, unable to rest in the skin we are currently in, terrified that our unpolished, unembellished self is fundamentally unappealing to the collective gaze. We forget that the choice to chase a ghost is a choice to remain suspended in a grey, sterile purgatory, where no real, authentic human connection can occur, and where our vital life force is slowly, quietly bled dry by the friction of our own manufactured image. To understand the deepest root of this condition, we must look beyond our individual psychological quirks and examine the collective conditioning that shapes our minds. We have been raised in a hyper-transactional society that teaches us that our worth as human beings is entirely conditional upon our visibility, our efficiency, and our capacity to generate a predictable, highly marketable persona. We have internalized the narrative that a successful life is one that can be perfectly managed, documented, and displayed from the outside, treating our minds as the tireless director of a lifelong publicity campaign. This conditioning creates an underlying, pervasive terror of our natural, non-linear human vulnerability. We view the wild, untamed, and unedited nature of our actual experiences not as a beautiful mystery to be danced with, but as an adversarial force that must be conquered through rigorous aesthetic and social engineering. This cultural sickness convinces us that to be ordinary, to be resting, or to allow our lives to unfold in their own unglamorous timing is a form of personal failure. We have traded the birthright of our natural presence for the cold, empty promise of digital validation, and in doing so, we have estranged ourselves from the deep, intuitive wisdom of our own bodies and the spontaneous, unfiltered baseline reality of life itself. This awareness of our physical and mental constriction forces us to confront a deeper truth about the nature of our distress. The exhaustion we carry is not a design flaw in our biology. It is the natural protest of a living vessel that has been forced to carry a weight it was never meant to bear. We cannot think our way out of a hall of mirrors, when the very tool we are using to seek freedom is the same hyper-analytical intellect that continuously polishes the glass. As we sit here together, feeling the persistent tightness in our shoulders, the restriction in our chests, and the restless, rapid movement of our thoughts, we are being invited to notice the cracks in the mirror. We are being called to witness the absolute futility of trying to construct an authentic life out of nothing but abstract images, comparisons, and curated projections. The momentum of our shared observation now demands that we look deeper, beneath the physical surface of our tension, to dissect the exact psychological laws that govern this illusion, and to discover the precise, ancient wisdom that can shatter the glass of the mirror maze once and for all. We carry this intense structural burden into the very center of our lives, watching our vitality burn down to a fine grey ash under the high-pressure demands of a transactional world. Yet a deeper, visceral shift begins to unfold within the silent theater of our shared consciousness. To completely unweave the smoldering tethers of our creative burnout, reclaim our intrinsic inspiration, and escape the exhaustion of constant self-monetization, we must hold our immediate experience entirely still under a sharp, uncompromising light of reality. We must look directly past our professional identities, our data dashboards, and our digital metrics, and dissect the precise psychological laws that cause us to actively participate in our own inner incineration. When we trace the origins of our deep background anxiety and creative depletion, we discover that our suffering rarely stems from the objective reality of our workload or the changing landscape of our industries, but from an invisible, lightning-fast loop of self-inflicted mental torture that operates beneath our conscious awareness. Thousands of years ago, a profound psychological insight was observed regarding the nature of human pain, teaching us that whenever an unexpected crisis, a professional setback, or a seasonal drop in creative energy occurs in our lives, Our biological frame is instantly struck by a specific sequence of dual experiences. The first experience is the raw, unedited event itself, an unexpected market shift, an algorithm change that reduces our visibility, an empty white canvas that yields no immediate ideas, or the simple physical exhaustion of a long week. This initial touch contains no personal failure or inherent malice. It is simply the natural friction of a dynamic nonlinear world, bringing a localized sting, a flash of genuine fatigue, or a moment of authentic confusion that passes through our experience like a sudden cloudburst across an open valley, yet almost instantaneously, before the echo of that first event has even faded from our nervous system. We pick up a heavy psychological weapon with our own hands and repeatedly drive it deep into our own consciousness. This secondary strike is our elaborate internal commentary, our obsessive overthinking, our toxic self-blame, and our terrified projection of future destitution or artistic irrelevance. The first event causes a basic, manageable discomfort, but this second strike creates the vast, drowning ocean of our psychological suffering. When a project underperforms, a metric drops, or an afternoon passes without production, that is merely the first touch of reality. But when we spend the subsequent weeks lying awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, viciously telling ourselves that we have lost our talent, meticulously scripting 32 catastrophic scenarios of professional ruin, and agonizingly punishing ourselves for being a real, limited human being instead of an omnipotent creative machine, we are actively delivering the second strike to ourselves. We become both the torturer and the tortured, trapped in an exhausting loop of identity warfare. We fail to realize that our systemic burnout does not come from the genuine tasks of our creative or professional landscape. It comes entirely from the immense volume of secondary editing, performance anxiety, and status maintenance we choose to inflict upon our minds. We are not suffocating because we are successful or passionate. We are suffocating because we are trying to force a wild, living fire to burn according to an industrial timetable. If we trace the trajectory of this secondary psychological weapon to its ultimate point of origin, we inevitably discover that our entire modern cage of monetization and metric addiction is anchored to a single foundational illusion: the myth of a permanent, isolated self that must be beautifully curated and defended at all costs. We operate under the unconscious, unquestioned assumption that there is a solid, unchanging entity called my career, my talent, my reputation, or my creative brand sitting at the very center of our lives. We treat this fabricated persona like a fragile glass sculpture, believing that if we show an unedited flaw, experience an uninspired season, or allow our productivity velocity to drop, this sculpture will shatter into pieces and we will cease to exist or matter to the collective tribe. This is why our modern decision fatigue and creative drought feel so terrifyingly existential, and why choosing to rest feels like a matter of absolute survival. We are not just navigating ordinary livelihood, we are carrying the immense, exhausting burden of believing that we must permanently manufacture and protect a static ego construct. We forget that this rigid, high-status identity we are destroying our physical biology to protect is not a permanent monument. It is a conceptual ghost, a fluid, ever-changing mosaic of temporary thoughts, professional roles, social agreements, and passing mental states that has no fixed core. By treating this ghost as a permanent reality that must be constantly fortified through hypervigilance, we doom ourselves to a lifetime of defensive warfare against our own nature. To completely break the power of this illusion, we must open our eyes to the overarching, liberating truth of absolute impermanence, realizing that the very nature of reality is not a static ledger to be managed, but an unceasing, fluid tapestry that weaves itself anew with every passing microsecond. Every atom in our physical vessel is in a state of continuous, ecstatic exchange with the living world around us. The cells of our heart, our skin, and our lungs are constantly dying and being reborn, and the very breath we draw in right now was once the breath of ancient oceans and distant forests. Our creative ideas, our professional titles, our financial assets, and our most intense anxieties are not solid boulders. Anchored in our consciousness, they are ephemeral currents of energy, rising from nothingness, dancing for a brief moment in our awareness, and dissolving back into the silence from which they came. When we understand this deeply, the frantic, white-knuckled need to control every thread of our financial and creative future completely evaporates. We realize that a sudden creative drought, a career restructuring, or a shifting lifestyle pattern is not a permanent stain on an unchanging identity, but simply a single, temporary wave passing through a changing sea. There is no permanent innovator self to be ruined by an ordinary change, and there is no static future to be permanently secured by an endless monetization of our joy. The landscape of tomorrow is written entirely in water, and our attempts to carve our certainty into it with the dull knife of overthinking is a form of madness that only ensures our present misery. Let us look closely at the true nature of this mental grip we hold so tightly, for we often confuse our chronic performance, anxiety, and passion monetization with dedication, responsibility, or high artistic standards. In the quiet corridors of our minds, we tell ourselves that our intense worry over metric maintenance is a reflection of our commitment to growth, or that our frantic monetization of every hobby is a sign of our personal optimization. But under the clinical, compassionate gaze of raw awareness, we see that this grip is not driven by love, responsibility, or true inspiration. It is driven by a deep, terrifying undercurrent of resistance to the natural, changing flow of life. It is a tight, white-knuckled grasp on a highly specific, idealized projection of how our lives must look in order for us to feel allowed to rest. We are holding our breath, demanding that the natural atmosphere of reality stop moving, so that we never have to face the vulnerability of being seen as simply human, resting, and empty. This attachment to constant output is a form of spiritual stagnation, a rigid refusal to allow our lives to unfold in their own majestic, unpredictable, and often seasonal timing. When we demand that our creative expressions and our data dashboards follow a perfectly linear, ascending script, we are suffocating the very life force out of our existence. We are trying to preserve a living forest by turning it into a hyper-efficient logging mill. We may generate a predictable stream of short-term commodities, but we ensure that the living ecosystem is permanently reduced to a wasteland of grey ash. The moment we fully comprehend the absolute futility of this resistance, a profound structural shift begins to occur within the depths of our consciousness. We begin to see that our overthinking, comparing, and transactional mind is like a small, frantic creature barking at a passing thunderstorm, completely convinced that its noise is what keeps the sky from destroying the house. The storm of life moves according to vast, natural systemic movements that have absolutely nothing to do with our intellectual anxieties, our spreadsheets, or our curated filters. When we realize this, we can finally experience a deep, systemic drop in our internal electrical voltage. We can look at our unfinished career trajectories, our real human limitations, and our completely uninspired afternoons, and we can look at the wild uncertainty of our modern society, and we can choose to lower our weapons. We can step out of the war room of our comparative intellect and stand nakedly in the open field of immediate, unadorned reality. We can feel the precise millisecond the mind tries to pick up that second weapon of self-judgment, and with a soft, spacious breath, we can simply choose to let it drop to the floor. We no longer need to look at our human lives as a commercial product to be optimized and marketed, but as an incredible, unfolding mystery to be lived, trusted, and experienced through the intelligence of an open, undefended heart. This drop in voltage allows us to notice the immediate space around us with an entirely fresh quality of perception. Recognizing that the prison of the gold filigree and the ash of the creative engine only exist as long as we continue to tighten the wires and rub the dry wood together under forced pressure. The moment we refuse to give our finite attention to the phantom metrics of accumulation, the golden handcuffs lose their locking power over our biological systems. We can feel our chest wall expanding with a new, raw permission to breathe, realizing that our value was never something that could be captured by an executive title, calculated by a financial ledger, or contained within a digital profile. Our true value is the very field of awareness in which these passing symbols and seasonal cycles occur, an unclassifiable, boundless depth that remains completely untouched by whether we are visible or invisible to the digital crowd. We are ready to move past the exhausting defense of an idealized creative ghost, to leave the cold, white light of our monitors behind, and to step directly into the practical architecture of our own somatic reclamation, discovering how to anchor our wild, wandering minds into the solid, unembellished sanctuary of the physical present. We sit here in the heavy, warm quiet that follows the shattering of our lifelong illusions, feeling the initial drops of a deep psychological downpour clean away the dust from our internal windows. We look at our empty hands and see that by refusing to hold up the heavy, silver-lined mirrors of public validation, our fingers have finally relaxed their frantic white-knuckled grasp, the realization that our digital ghosts are completely bloodless and that we have been systematically starving our raw biological frames to feed an insatiable simulated identity, leaves us in a state of pristine, uncarved stillness. But this stillness is not a vacuum, it is a fertile, spacious valley where the real labor of somatic and cognitive reclamation begins. To step completely out of the mirror maze and establish an unshakable sovereignty over our everyday consciousness, we must design an inner architecture that is highly practical, fiercely disciplined, and deeply anchored in the tactile truth of our physical vessels. We require a method to transition from being the exhausted curator of our reflections to being the living, breathing ground upon which reality spontaneously unfolds. This active transformation begins at the absolute baseline of our biological organism, within the immediate, non-negotiable landscape of the physical frame we are inhabiting right now. Whenever we notice our attention being pulled upward into the electrical storm of the cerebral cortex, whenever we catch our fingers twitching toward that pane of black glass to check our digital visibility, or whenever the internal jury begins to prosecute our ordinary human flaws, we must instantly execute a somatic counter-maneuver. We do not try to argue with our thoughts, because the analytical intellect loves nothing more than a circular debate. Instead, we completely withdraw the fuel of our attention from the mind and drop it like a heavy stone straight down into the pelvic floor and the deep center of our gravity. We feel the dense, real pressure of our sit bones anchoring into the chair, the weight of our thighs pressing against the cushion, and the firm, unyielding support of the floor meeting the soles of our feet. We take a slow, deep, continuous breath, deliberately driving the air past the frozen armor of our chest wall and deep into the soft, expanding basin of the lower abdomen. As the belly swells like a gentle wave, it physically stretches the vagus nerve, sending an immediate chemical message of absolute safety directly to our survival brain. We consciously allow the shoulders to drop away from the ears, feeling the long, dense trapezius muscles soften their chronic vigilance. We track the release of tension as the tiny hot knots at the base of our skull begin to loosen their grip, letting the head rest in its natural skeletal alignment rather than straining forward in a posture of permanent evaluation. We consciously open the jaw, allowing a pocket of empty space to form between the upper and lower teeth, and we let the tongue drop away from the roof of the mouth, resting softly like a sleeping creature on the floor of the oral cavity. We are establishing a biological shoreline. By anchoring our awareness in these heavy, visceral sensations, we prove to our nervous system that the present room is entirely secure, and we create a solid platform from which we can observe the frantic movement of our comparative thoughts without being swept away by them. Once we are firmly anchored on this biological shoreline, we can turn our attention to the visual field and begin retraining the very mechanics of how we perceive the world around us. Because we have spent years staring into the narrow, high-density focus of digital screens, our optic nerves have become hyperstimulated and structurally narrow, locking our minds into a state of sharp, aggressive concentration that naturally breeds evaluation and anxiety. To break this neural pattern, we practice the art of the peripheral gaze. As we sit here, without moving our head even a millimeter, we slowly and consciously open the outer edges of our vision. We allow our eyes to soften their focus on the object directly in front of us. And we invite our awareness to expand outward, to include the entire physical room, the soft shadows in the corners, the texture of the walls beside us, the space above our head, and the flat ground beneath our knees. This simple neurological shift from central focus to peripheral open vision instantly deactivates the sympathetic nervous system, shifting our brainwaves out of the rapid, anxious patterns of identity defense and into the deep, slow frequencies of environmental presence. We are no longer looking at the world as a consumer or a critic searching for a frame to capture. We are simply allowing the immediate space to paint itself upon our retinas, resting as a passive, silent witness to the unglamorous beauty of unmonetized reality. With our bodies grounded and our eyes softened, we are now prepared to dismantle the mirror maze of our thoughts. Through the precise cognitive practice of objective mapping, when we are lost in the loop of digital comparison, we completely merge with the internal commentary, believing that we are the insecure voice that feels inadequate or the perfectionist director that demands a flawless display. Through the discipline of bare awareness, we create a clear, luminous wedge of space between the observing consciousness and the passing mental phenomena. As an evaluative thought rises from the dark waters of the mind, instead of hopping into the chariot of its narrative, we stay firmly rooted in our bones and apply a silent onward structural label to it. If the mind begins to whisper that our life is less successful than the filtered lifestyle of an online stranger, we do not engage in self-defense. We simply name the process in our mind, comparing. If the intellect begins to design a highly curated script for our next social interaction to hide our vulnerability, we gently label it editing. If the memory drifts back to an unpolished moment from our past, trying to recarve our image, we stamp it remembering. This precise, unemotional labeling acts like a powerful solvent on an industrial adhesive. It instantly strips the thought of its structural authority, transforming it from a terrifying, absolute truth into nothing more than a temporary, pixelated cloud of mental moisture passing through the vast, open sky of our awareness. We begin to realize that our thoughts have no native power to make us suffer unless we actively give them our breath, our belief, and our muscular tension. As we master this capacity to watch our thoughts pass without eating them, we unlock the strength to practice a deeper, more radical quality of internal discipline, the capacity to sit comfortably with the incomplete picture. Our modern culture has infected us with an acute intolerance for ambiguity, an agonizing need to know how our story will end, how our image will be received, or whether our choices will yield perfect security. This intolerance keeps us in a state of chronic, hyperactive manipulation, permanently adjusting our behaviors, our projects, and our expressions to force a predictable outcome. We must counter this exhaustion by cultivating the art of sacred non-striving, an internal posture where we completely drop our hands from the loom and allow our unpolished human lives to sit in their natural raw state. Think of a deep wilderness pond that has been violently stirred up by a passing storm. The mud from the bottom rises to the surface, making the water completely brown, opaque, and turbulent. If we try to clear that water by stepping into it and using our hands to scoop out the dirt, we only succeed in making it infinitely muddier. But if we simply sit quietly on the shoreline, keeping our bodies entirely still and leaving the water completely untouched, the heavy sediment naturally settles to the bottom through its own organic gravity, and the pool becomes perfectly transparent, reflecting the true moon with absolute crystalline clarity. Our minds operate under the exact same structural law. When we have the courage to stop fixing, stop filtering, and stop editing our presence, the background confusion of our identity dysmorphia naturally settles. The true, authentic path forward reveals itself not through the frantic calculations of the comparative intellect, but through the spontaneous, quiet crystallization of our innate bodily intelligence. To anchor this transformation into the practical fabric of our modern existence, we must establish a boundary around our attention, initiating a daily ritual of voluntary invisibility. We must recognize that our attention is the most sacred, precious currency we possess, and that we have allowed it to be systematically hijacked, fragmented, and turned into profit by digital architectures designed to keep us looking into the mirrors of comparison. We commit to a discipline of structured digital fasting, carving out unnegotiable zones in our day where our black glass screens are completely banished from our sight and touch. During these sanctuaries of silence, we retrain our nervous systems to find absolute completion in the microlayers of ordinary, unmonetized life. When we wash a ceramic bowl in the sink, we do not allow our minds to float forward to our digital profiles or backward to our professional anxieties. We bring our entire universe into the warmth of the soapy water against our wrists, the smooth weight of the clay in our hands, the rhythmic swirl of the sponge, and the crisp sound of water splashing against stainless steel. When we walk down a crowded city street, we refuse the urge to pull out our devices to immunize ourselves against boredom. Instead, we open our peripheral gaze and actively feel the physical impact of our heels striking the concrete, the temperature of the wind moving across our ears, and the raw, unedited symphony of humanity passing by around us. We are reclaiming the dignity of our primary experience, discovering that a human life does not need to be documented, archived, or validated by a network to be entirely sacred, luminous, and complete. Let us feel the immense, weightless liberation that begins to pour into our bodies as we commit to this practical architecture of the open hand. We look inward and realize that we are no longer standing before the mirror maze of our lives as terrified, hyper-vigilant security guards, desperately trying to polish every reflection and hide every human crack from the world. We are standing as the very space through which the changing tapestry of reality moves, fully responsible, deeply engaged, yet completely untethered from the white-knuckled need for visual perfection. We see that our true value was never something that could be contained within a digital profile, measured by an engagement algorithm, or captured by a camera lens. Our value is the boundless, unclassifiable depth of this immediate breath, an internal sanctuary that remains completely unbroken, whether we are celebrated or forgotten by the public crowd. We can take a deep, spacious breath. We can let our shoulders drop completely into the earth, and we can allow our hands to open wide, ready to step out of the narrow blueprint of our thoughts and into the vibrant, unadorned landscape of our actual existence. The lingering warmth of that expanding breath stays with us, grounding our weight firmly into the floor beneath our feet, as the complex machinery of our chronic creative exploitation and continuous self-monetization finally grinds to a complete, liberating halt. We can feel a profound change occurring right here in the physical perimeter of our cells, a deep structural softening that signals the arrival of a completely new state of human consciousness. The invisible iron bands that have bound our anterior neck muscles and our suboccipital nerves for decades seem to melt away, allowing the skull to balance effortlessly atop the spine like a drop of morning dew resting on a lotus leaf. Our chest, once a tight, collapsed fortress of shallow breaths and protective shielding, opens up into a vast windswept valley where the lungs can expand and contract with the ease of ocean tides. The tongue remains soft on the floor of the oral cavity, the jaw remains completely loose, and the skin across our forehead becomes as smooth as the surface of a wilderness lake on a windless night. We are no longer a frantic worker trapped inside a sweating, vibrating room of mirrors. We have stepped out of the exhibition entirely and are standing under the immense, unblemished dome of an open, natural sky. In this deep clarity, we realize that the mind is not a cluttered storage unit or a commercial gallery that needs to be constantly organized, curated, or defended against criticism, but rather a transparent mountain pool that reflects everything while remaining completely untouched by the images passing across its surface. We watch our remaining comparative thoughts arise, glide through our awareness, and dissolve back into nothingness, exactly like white clouds moving across an infinite blue firmament without leaving a single scar or scratch upon the sky. The frantic need to know what happens next, the agonizing pressure to force an immaculate aesthetic decision, and the exhausting compulsion to look for external validation are replaced by a monumental, unshakable self-sovereignty. We feel a profound inherent safety in the simple fact of our own existence, a realization that we do not need to purchase our belonging or our right to rest through perpetual self-monitoring or immaculate forecasting. The world before us loses its razor-sharp edges of threat and social demand, transforming instead into a beautiful shifting landscape of pure potentiality, where every single choice is no longer an existential crisis, but a joyful, creative movement of our native, unfiltered intelligence. This is the great baseline of immanent groundedness, the unadvertised freedom that has always belonged to us, waiting patiently beneath the loud artificial architecture of our fears and our digital personas. We see now that the entire universe is an intertwined, living fabric that weaves itself in perfect harmony, and that we are an organic, inseparable strand within that magnificent design, requiring no editing to be worthy of our place. When we drop our hands from the mirrors, we are not abandoning our lives to chaos. We are trusting the deep, evolutionary current that has sustained us through every heartbeat, every breath, and every hidden transition of our lives. We understand that we possess an internal resilience that is fully capable of meeting whatever reality brings to our doorstep, meaning we no longer need to exhaust our precious life force by living through 1,000 hypothetical evaluations before they even arrive. We can walk through our modern, chaotic environments with a heart that is profoundly porous yet entirely unbreakable, responding to the challenges of our careers and relationships with absolute precision, unclouded by the heavy baggage of secondary self-judgment. As we prepare to transition from this quiet sanctuary of contemplation back into the active, moving theater of our daily modern lives, we carry this luminous stillness within our marrow like an invisible, unyielding compass. We remember the ancient, timeless encouragement left to us by the teacher of teachers, who urged us to be islands unto ourselves, to be our own light, and to look for refuge nowhere but within the immediate, raw reality of our own nature. We are reminded that the ultimate potential for liberation does not belong to a distant era or a special class of sages, but is a living, breathing reality encoded into the very mechanics of our present-day flesh and consciousness. The unedited events of our lives will continue to present themselves to us day after day, choice after choice, but we will never again mistake the movement of a phantom reflection for the value of our soul. We are the spaciousness in which the entire tapestry is happening, completely free, completely whole, and completely at peace in our own unembellished skin. So let us stand at this final threshold of our shared journey, letting the quietness settle into the deepest recesses of our being, and ask ourselves this one essential question to carry into the waking world. As we step back into the relentless rush of tomorrow, will we continue to struggle inside the mirror maze? Or will we finally have the courage to break the glass and live in the raw honesty of our own unfiltered presence?